This is Lyndhurst Mansion, one of America's most striking Gothic Revival homes overlooking the Hudson River, where its original interiors, custom furniture, artwork, original Tiffany's lamps and stained glass, and more than a century of family history are still preserved inside this Victorian Gilded Age time capsule. Set on 67 acres in Tarrytown, New York, right beside the legendary village of Sleepy Hollow, these grounds were even used to film the New York Central Park scenes in HBO's The Gilded Age. It's one of the most distinctive historic homes in all of America. Designed from the outside in and later expanded by the same architect, the house was built to evoke the romance of old world castles and grand palaces of Europe. For more than 120 years, only 3 families called this place home, and because so much of the original collection stayed here, Lyndhurst allows us to see how each generation left its mark, from progressive early Victorian design to the wealth and ambitious nature of the Gilded Age, and finally to the personal tastes of the last family members who preserved its legacy. Today, we're stepping inside Lyndhurst Mansion to explore its original interiors, uncover the stories of the 3 families who shaped the estate, and see the remarkable details that make this one of the most unforgettable Victorian time capsules in America. Hi, I'm Allie, and welcome back to Fab Little Dish, where we celebrate vintage homes, historic interiors, and the stories that keep these places alive. If you love exploring historic houses, then please hit thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps support the channel, and it brings more of a spotlight on these incredible places, encouraging people from all over to visit, learn their stories, and help keep them preserved. Now let's head to Tarrytown, New York, and step inside this remarkable piece of architectural and design history. Lyndhurst Mansion was very much designed around the land it sits upon, surrounded by 67 acres of winding pathways, sweeping lawns, a rose garden greenhouse, and stunning views of the Hudson River below. The estate creates an experience long before you even step inside. Originally designed in 1838, Lyndhurst is one of the earliest examples of landscape design by Alexander Jackson Davis, and he intentionally designed this house to be experienced with the landscape itself. The approach to the mansion was carefully planned to reveal the house slowly as you approach it. As visitors moved through the estate, they would catch glimpses of the roofline, towers, and stone-like exterior before the full mansion finally came into full view. Davis carefully considered how the house would be seen from different angles, how it would rise from the surrounding grounds, and how the architecture and landscape would work together to create one cohesive experience. It was meant to create a sense of drama and anticipation as you approach it, almost as if you're approaching an old European castle, where the house slowly reveals itself along the way. The Gothic Revival style was meant to evoke the romance of old-world castles, medieval architecture, and European country estates. With its pointed arches, steep rooflines, towers, and picturesque silhouettes, Lyndhurst looked completely different from the more classical homes that dominated American architecture at the time. Although Lyndhurst appears to be built entirely out of stone, the original structure was actually constructed of wood, with stone facing applied to the exterior to give it that castle-like appearance. You can still see slight differences in the color of the stone on parts of the mansion, because later expansions used stone from different quarries. Those subtle variations reveal the layers of the home's history right from the outside. In 1864, merchant George Merritt purchased the estate and brought Alexander Jackson Davis back to expand the original house. Rather than demolishing the original structure, Davis enlarged it. The expansion gave Lyndhurst its more dramatic appearance, larger, more romantic, and more in keeping in line with the growing scale and ambition of the Gilded Age. Because Lyndhurst passed through just 3 different families, so much of the original collection remains in place. Today, the estate holds thousands of objects connected to the families who lived here, with an extraordinary amount of the original furniture, artwork, decorative objects, and antiques that are still all preserved within the house. Many pieces were even designed by Alexander Jackson Davis himself, specifically for Lyndhurst. So when we walk through these rooms, we're about to see pieces that were created specifically for this mansion and meant to remain in the exact spots that we're going to be seeing them in today. That's what makes Lyndhurst feel like such a preserved piece of history. It allows us to see the evolution of interior design styles from 1842 all the way to 1961, when it was still lived in, and how each family used the house to express who they were, what they valued, and how they wanted to be seen by the outside world. Over the course of more than 120 years, only 3 families called Lyndhurst home, and each one left a different layer behind. The first was William S. Paulding Jr., a former mayor of New York City who commissioned the original country retreat in 1838. Although it was from his wife's fortune that built this home, Paulding wanted an escape from the city, and the house Alexander Jackson Davis created was so unusual for its time that critics reportedly nicknamed it Paulding's Folly. But that folly would eventually become one of the most important Gothic Revival houses in America. The second family was the Merritt family. George Merritt was a successful New York merchant who purchased the estate in 1864. He had the wealth and ambition to make Lyndhurst larger and more impressive, so he brought Alexander Jackson back to expand the home into the grand mansion that we see today. Davis doubled the size of the mansion, transforming the earlier country retreat into a much more dramatic Gothic Revival estate. Then, in 1880, Lyndhurst was purchased by Jay Gould, one of the wealthiest and most powerful financiers of the 19th century. Gould made his fortune in railroads and on Wall Street, and Lyndhurst became his refuge from the intensity of New York business life. The estate was close enough to the city that he could travel back and forth, but far enough away to feel like a private escape overlooking the Hudson River. And if you've seen the Gilded Age, Jay Gould helps bring that world truly into focus. He was the kind of real-life railroad titan who defined the era of new money, massive fortunes, powerful financiers, and grand estates built as both private retreats and public statements. He's often referred to as an inspiration for the character George Russell, the fictional railroad magnate in the series, because both represent that larger-than-life Gilded Age figure. Ambitious, controversial, incredibly wealthy, a huge family man, and operating in a world where money, power, society, and legacy were constantly colliding. But Lyndhurst was not only a symbol of Gould's wealth, it was also a family home. Gould purchased the estate partly because of its location. He worked on Wall Street and wanted a country retreat that was still close enough to New York City for him to come and go freely. He was also known to be deeply devoted to his children, and unusually for the time, he treated his daughters as capable heirs alongside his sons. When Jay Gould died in 1892, Lyndhurst passed to his daughter, Helen Gould, who became one of the most important figures in the estate's history. Helen was not simply an heiress. She was deeply involved in her father's business interests, served as executor of his estate, and studied law at New York University at a time when very few women had that opportunity. Although she was not able to formally graduate, since women weren't allowed to graduate, let alone practice law at the time. Unlike many women of her social class, Helen was not especially interested in society life. Instead, she became known for her philanthropy, using Lyndhurst and her fortune to support education, disadvantaged children, wounded soldiers, and women in need. At Lyndhurst, she started a sewing school for women in the surrounding community, welcoming women of all different races and religions. She wanted to help women gain practical skills, support them, and provide them with opportunities they normally wouldn't have received elsewhere. After marrying later in life and adopting children, Helen also made updates to the estate and landscape. Later, Lyndhurst was passed down to her younger sister, Anna Gould, Duchess of Talleyrand-Perigord. Anna's life brought a very different layer to the house. She married into French aristocracy, and throughout Lyndhurst, you can still see traces of the French taste and formality she brought back with her. Her personal life was very dramatic. She married 2 different French aristocrats, divorced her first husband after he cheated on her, and was able to maintain control of her wealth because of the way her father had protected his daughter's inheritance. When Anna returned to the United States in 1939, she brought with her the habits, furnishings, and tastes of the French aristocratic world she had lived in for decades. At Lyndhurst, Anna became known as the Duchess of Tarrytown, and she continued living with and preserving the family's furnishings and collections until her death in 1961. That same year, she donated Lyndhurst to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and Anna receives kind of a bad reputation as the selfish daughter since Helen devoted so much of her life to philanthropy. But without Anna, we would not have Lyndhurst to be able to enjoy and see today, because that same year when she died, she donated Lyndhurst to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And that long family stewardship is what makes Lyndhurst so special today. So much of what remains here was chosen for this house, lived within this house, and passed down through the families who called Lyndhurst home. That's why this mansion is different, and it's going to feel different as we step through each space. It's truly a Victorian Gilded Age time capsule, a preserved family home overlooking the Hudson River, where the rooms still hold the furniture, artwork, memories, and stories of the very people who lived inside. Here we're in the vestibule, and even in this little space we can already see signs of the home's evolution over time. There's 2 Gothic-style benches in here that have been intentionally placed next to each other. One dates to the original Paulding era, while the other was added later, after the house was expanded for George Merritt. Seeing them alongside one another is a direct comparison of Lyndhurst across generations. But the style becomes heavier, richer, and more elaborate as the house grows into the mansion that we see today. And here is a print showing the original structure of the house before it was expanded. This gives us a glimpse of what Lyndhurst looked like when it was still known as Knoll, the earlier country retreat designed by Alexander Jackson Davis for William Paulding Jr. As we move through the entry hall, the Gothic Revival details become even stronger. The front doors, pointed arches, diamond paned glass, and carved woodwork all help create that castle-like atmosphere Lyndhurst was designed to evoke. Even the walls and overhead surfaces were treated decoratively, with faux finishes meant to imitate more expensive materials and create a sense of richness from the moment a visitor stepped inside. These walls were meant to mimic marble, and the doors are painted pine, made to look like mahogany. These details would have been immediately noticed by visitors during the time, since the art of imitating these materials was more impressive than using the actual rich material itself. When William Paulding lived here, he placed busts of George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette in the entry hall right here. These have literally never been moved since they were placed here, and they are definitely statement pieces. Paulding came from a prominent New York family, and by placing Washington and Lafayette at the entrance to his home, he was connecting himself to the heroes of the American Revolution and presenting his own family as part of that patriotic legacy. It was also a way of saying, these are my people, and I align myself with them. He wanted his guests to know who he was associated with. And they have also decorated this space for our nation's 250th birthday, and I think that it looks quite lovely, don't you? The formal parlor is one of the best places to understand just how complete Alexander Jackson Davis's vision for Lyndhurst truly was. This room contains some of the oldest furniture in the house, dating back to the original Paulding era, and what makes it especially rare is that several of these pieces were designed by Davis himself specifically for this very room. So we're seeing the architect's vision carried all the way through into the interiors, through these furniture pieces, from the pointed arches and tall windows to the chairs, benches, and furnishings that are meant to live in this exact very same space. The room is also arranged with a strong sense of symmetry. The fireplaces, windows, doors, mirrors, and furniture all help create a balanced and formal setting, which would have immediately communicated refinement and taste to anybody entering this room. The mirrors in here helped reflect light from the windows, candles, and the oil lamps, which would have been especially important before electric lighting came into play. Without them, a room like this, especially where it is situated on the house, would have felt much darker, even during the daytime. The blue upholstery and carpet also give the room a softer, more elegant feeling against the Gothic woodwork and architectural details throughout. It's not overwhelming, even though you're standing in what was inspired by ornate European castles and cathedrals. And throughout the house, you're going to notice different costumes that are displayed in several rooms. I did ask my guide about these, and they were from a recent party that they had here that had a 1960s theme. A nod to the many parties that I am sure occurred here throughout the lifetime of the home. The music room is one of the most dramatic interiors here at Lyndhurst, and that's because of the ceiling. Every ceiling in this entire house is different and makes a statement, but this one really caught my eye. Painted with figures that almost look like they're floating overhead, it gives us a sense of movement and imagination. Combined with the Gothic tracery, stained glass windows, and rich woodwork, the effect is romantic and almost dreamlike, exactly the kind of atmosphere that Lyndhurst was meant to create, like you're stepping right inside a fairy tale. This room immediately shows how the house was designed to feel rich, theatrical, and completely immersive. Nearly everything in this room works together. The pointed Gothic windows, the carved wood surrounds, the mirrors, the furniture, painted ceiling, and the view out towards the landscape. What makes this room especially remarkable is that so much of it remains so closely to how it appeared in historic photographs. The furniture, piano, artwork, chairs, and even the decorative objects are all where they were originally placed. They belong to the house, and they help show how this room was actually used and how it was experienced. And you can really tell when you look at the old photographs that are displayed in each room. Everything really is exactly where it was left. One of Anna Gould's dresses is displayed here too. It's a style that was popular for themed balls during the 19th and early 20th centuries, and it really helps you envision life that might have been happening here behind these walls. This library was not part of the original 1838 house layout, but it became one of the most important rooms added as Lyndhurst grew into a larger and more elaborate estate. The original library was upstairs, but was later placed down here with its custom bookcases added in, and yes, all of these books are original to the families who lived here. The preserved details in this place are endless. The built-in bookcases were custom made for this room, with Gothic quatrefoil and trefoil designs that echo the windows, arches, and carved woodwork throughout the mansion. Even though this is a more intimate room than the formal parlor or the music room, it still carries the architectural language of the entire house. The leaded stained glass windows bring in soft filtered light, while the bookcases and darker wood details give the room a much more private, reflective atmosphere. Also, these portraits and paintings almost feel casually placed up here, but they remain where they were always originally placed. They are of the second owners, George and Julia Merritt, and on the other wall facing them are George's in-laws. I love that even these portraits were placed and left here just as they were when the Merritts lived here and transformed this space into their own personal library. So much of what we still see reflects how the families lived with these objects over time, and these are the little details that make it all feel so real. Adjoining the library is a smaller office, which gave the owners a more practical place to conduct business without bringing visitors through the private family rooms. That detail was especially important when Jay Gould lived here. As one of the most powerful financiers of the 19th century, he needed Lyndhurst to function not only as his country retreat, but he also needed to conduct business here, and this little room was crucial for that. It allowed him to handle business privately when necessary. A visitor coming in for business wouldn't have been taken through the grand public areas of the home. They would have instead had a more direct way through the store to meet in his office and leave without moving through the rest of the house. This is Jay Gould's office, and it features a Wooten desk. I've seen these in a few other Victorian homes, and they always stand out because they are a true statement piece and worth a lot of money. Every time he left Lyndhurst, he would wheel this thing out with him to the city. This is the dining room, and it truly is a space that makes your jaw drop. It was part of the major expansion that George Merritt made to Lyndhurst after purchasing the estate in 1864, and this is really where you can see the house growing into something grander, richer, and more in line with keeping with the scale of the opulent excess that defined the Gilded Age. But what I love about this room the most is that it still feels surprisingly livable. The table that sets 14 people, which is very impressive in itself, it does not feel overwhelming though, in the same way that other Gilded Age dining rooms can feel, especially in those Newport dining rooms like the Breakers. Instead of feeling like a huge banquet hall, it still feels like a room where a family and their guests could actually gather comfortably. I mean, that's even evident in the shape of the table itself, where there is no single obvious head of the table, giving the room a slightly more balanced and conversational feeling than a long, rigid dining hall that had a head at each end. The original Gothic Revival dining table and chairs were designed by Alexander Jackson Davis for the Merritt family, which makes these pieces that much more significant. They were meant to work with the architecture of the room surrounding them. You can see the Gothic Revival style in the pointed arches, the carved woodwork, the tracery, the tall, narrow forms, and even the backs of the chairs, which echo the architectural details of the house itself. The room also reflects the changing idea of wealth in America after the Civil War. As money and industry became increasingly concentrated in the North, houses like Lyndhurst helped define what new wealth was supposed to look like. Richly decorated, historically inspired, and filled with objects that showed taste, education, and a family status. Every surface in here is doing something, and I mean everything. The walls were hand stenciled to resemble embossed leather wallpaper, which was one of the most stylish and costly finishes of the time, and trust me, that would have been noticed as soon as you stepped into the room. And the marble-like columns in here are another example of Lyndhurst's incredible craftsmanship. Although they look like stone, they are actually hand-painted wood. This trompe-l'oeil technique was meant to fool the eye, with realistic veining painted by hand to match the surrounding marble. In fact, perfecting this kind of faux marble finish could be more expensive and more impressive than using the actual quarried stone itself. The fireplace is made of real red grain marble, but the wood and plaster columns surrounding it were intentionally painted to blend with the stone, creating the illusion of a richer and more unified interior. The radiator grates are another perfect example of how Davis's vision carried into even the most practical parts of the house. Instead of hiding the heating system with just some metal grates, the grates were made to be ornamental, using another opportunity for Gothic Revival detail to be added in. The stained glass windows are some of the room's most important focal points as well. They bring in color, pattern, and filtered light into what could otherwise be a very dark space. A uniform like this helps us picture the staff, the rituals, and the highly polished world of service that made a level of elegance like this possible. Because even in one of its most formal rooms, it feels grand, but it still feels incredibly lived in because of all of the original pieces that are still in here. The Grand Gallery is where Lyndhurst's Gilded Age story really comes into full focus. This is where the craft of collecting could truly be exercised and displayed. When George Merritt expanded Lyndhurst, this room was originally the library, and it was transformed into an art gallery to display his extensive collection. And later, when Jay Gould owned the house, it became home to his much larger painting collection that we still see here displayed today, just as it was when he lived here. Since the space originally served as a library, you can actually still see remnants of that earlier use in the carved corbels near the ceiling. These small corbels depict scholars and different literary figures, work directly right into the architecture itself. Many of the paintings in here belong to Jay Gould. For someone like Gould, collecting art was more about the beauty and the art of being able to collect itself. It was also what it said about taste, culture, education, and his status. During the Gilded Age, the paintings that you displayed told visitors what kind of world you wanted to belong to, and the ones you've experienced. The collection includes 19th century European paintings, the kind of work that was highly prized and sought after by wealthy American collectors before Impressionism became fashionable. One of the most significant works associated in this space is by William Adolphe Bouguereau. There's a few pieces of him throughout, and they are all just spectacular. These were paintings that would have immediately communicated refinement and wealth to anybody entering this room. Bouguereau was one of the most celebrated French academic painters of the 19th century. Any painting of his would have been instantly recognizable as a major statement piece, the kind of artwork that was truly meant to impress. The room itself feels almost like a private museum inside the house, and that was incredibly intentional. The tall Gothic windows, carved woodwork, dramatic ceiling, and richly framed paintings all work together to create a space that feels grand, formal, and deeply connected to the aspirations of the families who lived here. And the windows are just as important as the artwork. This room includes Tiffany stained glass, adding another layer of incredible craftsmanship, color, and Gilded Age luxury. The filtered light coming through the glass changes the atmosphere of the room throughout the day, making this gallery feel even more dramatic and beautiful. And that also helps make this space so powerful. It shows how Lyndhurst evolved from a family home into a showcase of wealth, taste, and collecting, while still preserving the objects, artwork, and atmosphere that belonged to the people who actually lived here and called this place home. And right off to the side here is Helen Gould's bedroom, which feels noticeably more restrained than many of the other rooms that we've seen so far. And that simplicity matches Helen's personality. This room originally belonged to her father, Jay Gould, who used it after purchasing Lyndhurst in 1880. After his death in 1892, Helen moved into this room and continued using it for decades. It was a quiet but symbolic shift. As Helen stepped into this space, she was also stepping into a much larger role within the family. She became the steward of Lyndhurst, helped manage her father's estate, became involved in family business interests, deeply involved in her philanthropy, and she continued preserving the house with great care. Unlike many women of her social class, Helen was known not for chasing society or creating an overly showy life for herself. Instead, she became known for her sense of responsibility, her philanthropy, and the practical way that she used her family's wealth. That same restraint comes through within this room. The furniture is still Gothic in style, with pointed arches and carved details that connect it to the rest of the home, but the overall feeling is quiet and just much more personal. This room is known as the state bedroom, and it was actually used as a spare bedroom for guests. Unlike many of the rooms that we've seen at Lyndhurst, this furniture set in here is not original to the house. Instead, the room has been arranged to suggest how a guest bedroom might have looked during the Gould era. But even with that difference, the room still gives us an incredible sense of the world Lyndhurst represented. The Tiffany stained glass window in here is one of the most spectacular features of the entire space. It just fills the room with an amazingly beautiful color. From here, you can look directly out over towards the grand gallery below. Just imagine being a guest waking up in this room, having your coffee, and just gazing at the art, architecture, and the view of the Hudson beyond. It's one of those spaces that really captures the feeling of making it during the Gilded Age, and you wanted your guests to feel that. This is the west bedroom, and it has a much quieter feeling than the rest of the grand public rooms that we've been looking at. The furniture in here appears later and simpler than some of the earlier Davis design pieces that we've been looking at. It has a more practical, early 20th century feeling, showing us how Lyndhurst just continued to evolve as each generation lived here and made different modifications to the house, truly making it their own over time. Another thing that makes Lyndhurst so interesting, where you can actually see the evolution of different design styles in different spaces within the house. This bathroom also shows another side of Lyndhurst's evolution. Although the mansion began as a Gothic Revival country house in the 19th century, it continued to be updated as each generation lived here. The marble sink with French-inspired porcelain basins, the clawfoot bathtub, plumbing fixtures, and the shower all reflect that later period of modernization, when bathrooms were becoming just more private, practical, beautiful, and comfortable. This is the Duchess's bedroom, and this belonged to Anna Gould, Duchess of Talleyrand Perigord, the last private owner of Lyndhurst, who donated it. After spending decades in Europe and marrying into French aristocracy, Anna returned to the United States in 1939 and brought with her a very different kind of elegance to Lyndhurst. Through the house, you can still see the influence of her French taste and style, but this room especially feels personal. Anna was known for loving beautiful things, and she was known as a big shopper. She loved clothing, accessories, furniture, and the kinds of objects that reflected the aristocratic life that she had once lived. This open trunk makes the room feel as though someone has just arrived or is preparing to leave, which feels fitting for Anna. Her life moved in between New York, Paris, aristocratic society, and eventually back here to Lyndhurst. This smaller sitting room shows another layer of how Lyndhurst continued to evolve over time. While the grand public rooms downstairs were designed for entertaining and display, spaces like this felt much more private and personal. The small bathroom that's tucked right here into the room was built for the service staff to use. This Tiffany lamp over here also is an indication of the family's taste. Beside it are personal photographs, including one of Anna with her dog and another of the Palais Rose, her grand French residence in Paris that no longer stands. This is known as the Star Bedroom, and it was originally Helen Gould's childhood bedroom that her sister later remodeled into a guest room once she returned from France. And you can see a lot of those French details throughout. The ceiling is truly what makes this space unforgettable. The first thing that draws your eyes is the vivid blue covered with all these tiny gold stars. It gives the room a softer, almost dreamlike quality, while still connecting back to the Gothic Revival architecture through the painted arches, carved woodwork, and the stained glass windows. The bedroom also shows how the house continued to evolve into the 20th century. This is not the same restrained Gothic Revival world of the earliest rooms downstairs. It feels softer, more glamorous, and more connected to Anna's own personality. While I was visiting, there was also an exhibit happening, and it was called the Lost and Found exhibit, which showed another side of Lyndhurst's preservation story, the objects that left the house over time and eventually found their way back. Over the years, pieces connected to the family and the estate were returned to the museum, including clothing, furniture, decorative objects, and even a dollhouse that was created as a tribute to Lyndhurst itself. And what makes this so meaningful is that these objects help fill in parts of the story that might otherwise have disappeared. Several of the pieces here connect Anna Gould to the fashionable world that she moved through in Europe. One dress was designed by Jérôme, one of Anna's favorite Parisian designers during the 1920s and 30s. The design shows the influence of the early Art Deco style, but what makes it especially moving is how little known the designer, Jérôme, is today. Despite his importance to women like Anna at the time, his legacy was largely lost after he died in the Holocaust and his fashion house disappeared as well. So seeing one of these dresses preserved here at Lyndhurst feels especially powerful. Another dress reflecting the changing fashions of the 1920s when flapper styles, shorter hems, and looser silhouettes were transforming the way women dressed. And then there's this French vanity with its painted porcelain panels, delicate cherubs displayed throughout. It is truly a breathtaking piece. It feels perfectly suited for the kind of personal, decorative world Lyndhurst preserves. I can just see this upstairs in Anna Gould's bedroom. This dollhouse is another wonderful detail because it recreates Lyndhurst in miniature fashion. It's almost like a love letter to the house itself. Seeing the rooms redecorated to this scale reminds us just how recognizable and distinct this house really is. It is so well known and such a piece of American architectural history. And I just love this exhibit because it really kind of puts together the rest of the remaining pieces of Lyndhurst's story, the ones that were scattered and returned and preserved. Each one adding another layer of history to the families who lived here and to the house itself. The bowling alley here shows another side of life at Lyndhurst as well. This was added during Helen Gould's time when she was living at the estate, and it reflects the changing social world of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Bowling was especially an interesting sport because it was one that men and women could enjoy together. In a world where so many activities were divided by gender, this became a more social and inclusive form of recreation. And even this space designed for leisure was designed with beauty in mind. The long wooden room, arched ceilings, warm paneling, and repeated windows make the bowling alley feel surprisingly elegant. It's practical but still connected to the craftsmanship and atmosphere of the estate. It also gives us more of a human glimpse of the family. After seeing the formal rooms, the bedrooms, the fine art collection, and all of the antiques throughout, this space reminds us that Lyndhurst was also a place for fun, gathering, and living. A family estate where people could come together outside of the more formal rituals of the house. The grounds at Lyndhurst are also just so spectacular. It sits on 67 acres, and you truly feel like you're walking through a public park, which is why it is such a fitting setting for HBO's The Gilded Age's Central Park scenes. There's a rose garden, which was absolutely gorgeous, and I was so glad I was able to see the roses in bloom since it was their last full week while they were peaking. They were all about to be gone the following week, so it truly was meant to be. The greenhouse is another incredible part of Lyndhurst's story. Today, only remnants remain, but at the time, it was one of the most impressive private greenhouses in all of America, where it held more than 40,000 plants. During World War II, when there was not enough coal to keep the place heated, Anna Gould auctioned off the plants to benefit the Red Cross. So even though we only see what remains today, the greenhouse once represented one of the most extraordinary living collections at Lyndhurst. This is the Rose Cottage, an adorable playhouse where Anna and Helen's nieces like to play, and there's also a cute little dog cottage right next to it too. As you leave Lyndhurst, you can't help but think about the evolution of design and how rare it is to see so many layers of a house still preserved in one place. This mansion began as an early Gothic Revival country retreat designed to feel romantic, dramatic, and deeply connected to the landscape around it. Over time, it stayed true to that originality, but it grew into a grander, Gilded Age estate, shaped by wealth, ambition, collections, more family life, and changing ideas of comfort and style at the time. And just because three families called this home for more than 120 years, so much of that story is still here. And much of what we saw here, the furniture, artwork, decorative objects, the interiors of the rooms themselves, and all of the personal belongings, they were all specifically chosen for this house, or brought back here, lived in with this house, photographed in this house, and passed down through the families who preserved this house. That is what makes Lyndhurst feel so incredibly different than any of the other Gilded Age mansions that we have seen on this channel and that you can see throughout the country. This is a true Victorian time capsule overlooking the Hudson River, a place where architecture, interiors, landscape, and family history all still speak to one another in a very beautiful, cohesive way. Each room holds a different layer of the people who lived here, what they valued, how they wanted to be seen, and what they chose to leave behind as part of their legacy. Let me know which room or detail stood out to you the most here. As always, thank you so much for watching and touring this incredible mansion with me today. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on the amazing lineup of historic homes that I have coming your way. You're not going to want to miss out, so make sure to also hit that notification bell so you're alerted each time one of my videos is released. Until next week, my friends, keep enjoying the beauty of vintage home. Au revoir.